The first time the words appeared, they floated over the brackish canal like gnats made of light, sharp enough to read and impossible to swat away. I was carrying a bucket of shrimp shells to the compost heap behind my shack, watching the tide creep under the docks, when the air in front of me filled with pale sentences that didn't belong to any mouth in town. If you leave him there, he burns the pier. No one listens until the smoke. I blinked hard, thinking it was fatigue or sunstroke. The letters held steady, hovering at the height of my chest as if someone had taped them to the world. Another line popped in beneath it. Playful and cruel at once. This is the part where he learns to hate. Keep watching. I dropped the bucket. Shrimp shells scattered like pink confetti across the sand. The smell was sharp and sour, and in it I tasted the same fear I'd known as a child when adults argued about whether I was worth the trouble. My name is Mara Quinn. I am 32, a ferry mechanic when the engines behave, and a crab trap fixer when they don't, and I live on the edge of Greywater Marsh where the reeds whisper secrets the town pretends not to hear. I wasn't born here. I washed up, in a manner of speaking, after my mother died and my father's drinking turned our apartment into a room of broken glass. The county sent me to a series of homes, and I learned early that kindness can be real and still be conditional. That is why, when the words in the air pointed like a finger toward a house at the far end of Dock Street, I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen them. Dock Street's last house belonged to Silas Rojas, a man built like a gatepost with hands that always smelled faintly of gasoline. He'd come down from the highway a year earlier with a new girlfriend and a son he didn't talk about. The boy was called Eli. People said his mother had gone back north, the way they said storms move on after tearing up roofs. The boy lived in the lean-to behind the house, a converted shed that had once held nets and now held a child. I'd seen him through the slats when I walked past. Bare feet on concrete, shoulders too narrow for his age, eyes that didn't follow anyone's face for long. Sometimes I left a sandwich in a paper bag on the fence post. Sometimes it vanished. Sometimes it stayed there until the ants claimed it, and then I'd find the bag shredded like a tiny surrender. That afternoon, as I stood with shrimp shells at my feet, more words drifted into view, stacking like tide lines on the air. She thinks he's a tool. He learns he is one. Count to 3, then he hurts someone. He hurts someone, the letters insisted, and the way they said it made it sound inevitable, like rust or sunrise. I backed away from the text, turned, and walked straight to the corner store where the bulletin board still smelled of pine cleaner and old paper. I pinned up a job notice that I didn't need, reliable help needed for marsh repairs, just to give myself a reason to look busy. And I watched Dock Street through the glass. Silas's girlfriend, June Harrow, came out with a cigarette, her hair in a tight knot like she was saving anger for later. She flicked ash into the grass and shouted something into the shed. A small figure flinched. No sound came back. A new line of light flashed in front of my eyes. You can buy him out. It will cost you everything you've saved. It costs more to do nothing. My hands tightened on the pushpin until it bent. I went home and opened the tin box beneath my bed, the one that held my life in small, heavy pieces. A stack of folded bills, a handful of quarters, and the only jewelry I owned, a bracelet of old gold coins that had belonged to my grandmother, each stamped with a date from another century. I'd sworn never to pawn it. It was my proof that I came from someone who had once been loved without negotiation. The coins were warm from the day's heat, and as I held them, the floating words returned. Softer now, almost urgent. Not yet. Gold matters later. Keep the coins if you can. I laughed aloud. A short sound with no joy in it. The marsh outside answered with a chorus of frogs. Who are you? I asked the empty kitchen. What do you want from me? The letters didn't reply. They simply blinked, then changed. If you need a reason, look at his hands. I did. In my mind, I saw Eli's hands gripping the fence post, fingers pale where the nails had been bitten down, knuckles scabbed. I had been that child once, hiding bruises under sleeves, learning to keep my face blank so adults wouldn't accuse me of inviting trouble. I sat on the floor with the tin box open and made the smallest, hardest decision of my life. I would go to Silas Rojas and offer money for his son. Not as charity. Not as rescue. As a transaction, because men like Silas understood transactions better than mercy. That night I walked to the dock to clear my head. The tide was low, exposing mud that shone like spilled oil. The ferry's lights blinked across the water, and for a moment I imagined the pier in flames, smoke curling into the stars. The thought made my stomach twist. All right, I whispered to the dark. If the words are a warning, I'm listening. In the air, a single line appeared, steady as a compass needle. Go at midday. Bring wit, not tears. At midday the next day, heat pressed down on Greywater like a wet blanket. I walked to Dock Street with a canvas bag on my shoulder and my heartbeat in my throat. June Harrow opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching through the curtains. Her eyes slid over me, measuring. "Can I help you?" she asked, in the tone of someone who didn't intend to. I held up the bag. "I'm here to talk about Eli," I said. Her mouth curved. "That boy?" She turned her head and shouted, "Silas, your saint is back." Silas appeared with a beer even though it was barely noon. He leaned against the frame, blocking the dim hallway behind him. "Mara Quinn," he said, like my name had a price tag. "What is it now?" I looked past him, toward the shed. Through a cracked window I saw movement, a shadow shifting, as cautious as a trapped animal. The words in the air flickered at the edge of my vision. "Don't beg. Offer. Walk away first." I lifted my chin. "I want to take the boy," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I'll pay." June laughed. A sound like broken shells. "You want to buy a child?" "I want to buy the boy's freedom," I said. "Call it whatever you want." Silas's eyes sharpened. "How much?" I had rehearsed a number, but the words flashed again. "Start low. Let them show their greed." I said, 2,000. It was nearly all I had, if I counted the money I'd saved by living small and working extra shifts on the ferry. June's laugh stopped. Silas's brows rose. Then June leaned in. Voice honeyed with contempt. 2,000 doesn't cover what he's worth, she said. He can carry gear. He can clean fish. He can do chores. And he's a boy. Boys are useful. I felt something hot and poisonous rise in my chest. Instead of letting it show, I shrugged. "Then I guess I'm not interested," I said, and turned as if to leave. My hands shook, but I kept walking. Behind me, June's voice snapped. "Wait." Silas stepped after me. "Fine," he said quickly. 2,000. Cash. I stopped, turned back, and met his eyes. 2,000, and I don't want you coming near my property again, I said. June scowled. "Who do you think you are?" The words pulsed. "Push on one thing. Safety," I repeated. "You don't come near my place. Ever." Silas hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, whatever." He was already seeing the money as a bicycle, a generator, a week of drinking. June spat into the grass. "Bring him out," I said. Silence stretched. Then the shed door creaked. Eli stepped into the sun. He was smaller than I expected, thin enough that the breeze seemed to move him. His hair fell over his forehead in stiff, uneven strands, like it had been cut with dull scissors. He didn't look at June or Silas. He didn't look at me either. His gaze fixed on the ground a few feet in front of his toes, as if the earth was safer than faces. A chain hung from his ankle, not thick, not dramatic, but real enough that my mouth went dry. June held the other end with casual ownership. "He bites," she said, and gave the chain a sharp tug. Eli stumbled, caught himself without a sound. The words screamed in my vision. "Don't react. Get him out." I forced my hands to stay steady. "I have the money," I said. Silas took the bag and dumped the bills onto the porch steps to count. June tossed me a rusty key with 2 fingers. "If he runs back, he's yours to chase," she said. "He won't," I answered, though I wasn't sure. I crouched a little so my voice would carry to Eli without towering. "Eli," I said softly. He flinched at his name, like it hurt. "I'm Mara. Come with me. You're leaving." He didn't move. The chain glinted. June lifted her hand as if she might yank again. Before she could, I stepped forward, unlocked the shackle, and slid it off Eli's ankle. The skin beneath was raw. My fingers brushed it, feather light, and I felt him tense as if expecting pain. I swallowed. "Let's go," I said. I offered my hand without insisting. Eli stared at it for a long moment, then took it in a grip so tight his knuckles whitened. We walked away while Silas counted money, and June's laugh followed like a thrown stone. Halfway down the street I heard Silas call after me. "You're making a mistake, Quinn." I didn't answer. The air near my shoulder filled with one quiet line. "You just changed the current. Keep swimming." I didn't understand what that meant, but Eli's hand in mine was warm and real, and that was enough. My shack sat on pilings over the marsh, reached by a narrow boardwalk that groaned underfoot. Eli froze at the first creak, eyes darting to the water below as if it might swallow him. "It's safe," I said. "It just complains." Inside, the house smelled of salt, grease, and lemon soap. I'd cleaned that morning until my arms ached, as if cleanliness could convince the world I was qualified to be anyone's guardian. Eli hovered near the door. He kept his shoulders turned so he could bolt. I didn't stop him. I simply set a bowl on the table, rice, beans, and a piece of fish I'd smoked myself. I sat across from it and started eating, slowly, deliberately, like it was normal. The words drifted in. Let him watch. Food is a language. After a minute, Eli stepped forward and ate with a speed that wasn't hunger alone, but fear. Fear that the food would vanish. Fear that eating would trigger punishment. Fear that if he didn't take what he could, he'd regret it. When he finished, he held the bowl as if it were a shield. I waited until his breathing slowed. "Bathroom's through there," I said, pointing. "Bed's in the back room. You can sleep in it if you want." He didn't go. At night, I laid a blanket on the floor near the stove and turned down the lamp. Eli watched the bed, then watched the floor, and finally curled up on the blanket with his knees to his chest. He kept his eyes open for a long time. I stayed awake too, listening to the marsh, to the faint tapping of insects against the screen, to the quiet, desperate rhythm of a child trying not to exist too loudly. Around midnight, he slipped off the blanket and moved to the corner behind the pantry, where shadows were deepest. He pressed his forehead to the wall. I didn't force him back. I only said into the dark, "No one here is going to hit you." The words appeared once more, less like commands and more like a sigh. Patience. He doesn't know this kind of quiet. The next morning, Eli woke with a fever. His skin burned, the ankle wound had wept, and the small scratches on his arms looked angry and swollen. I carried him to the clinic by the highway and paid with money that had been meant for winter repairs. The nurse asked questions with the practiced suspicion of someone who'd seen too many lies. "He's mine now," I said, and the words sounded strange in my mouth. The nurse cleaned the wound, gave antibiotics, and told me to keep him hydrated. I brought Eli home and spooned him broth. He didn't cry. He didn't even complain. He simply endured, which was its own kind of heartbreak. In the air above the stove, the strange commentary fluttered like moths. Warm cloth on his forehead. "Don't let him see you panic." "You're doing good, Mara." The last line startled me. It was the first time the letters had used my name without threat. Fever broke on the third day. Eli sat up, eyes clearer, and for the first time he looked at me directly. His gaze was steady for a heartbeat, then slid away as if eye contact was a cliff edge. That same afternoon I found evidence of him moving when I wasn't watching. The old wind-up radio on my shelf had been turned over, screws removed and set neatly beside it. The radio didn't work anymore, but Eli had opened it like a puzzle. When he noticed me noticing, he froze, expecting anger. I held up my hands. "You can take things apart," I said. "Just put the screws in the jar when you're done." He stared, as if waiting for the second half of the sentence to be the punishment. None came. He nodded once, a tiny motion, and went back to the radio. The words in the air jittered with excitement. "He likes mechanisms. Let him fix what was broken." It was strange, to be guided by invisible spectators, but sometimes their advice was simply common sense, stripped of pride. Over the next weeks, Eli expanded inch by inch. He learned that the bathroom was where you went, not the floor. He learned that I wouldn't take his food away, so he didn't have to inhale it. He learned that when I left for work, I came back. That was the hardest lesson, I think. Permanence. I left him small tasks sorting bolts by size, winding the crab trap line, cleaning the heron feathers I sometimes found on the dock. He did them without being asked, not to impress, but because tasks were the only structure he trusted. One evening, while checking my traps at dusk, I found a juvenile heron tangled in fishing line near the reeds, wing twisted and eyes wild. I cut it free and carried it home in my jacket. Eli watched from the doorway, rigid. The heron pecked at my fingers, drawing blood. Eli flinched at the sight, but then he stepped forward, slow as a sunrise, and held out a rag. "For you," he rasped. It was his first voluntary word. 2 words, really, but they landed in my chest like a bell. I wrapped my finger and nodded toward the bird. "Help me?" I asked. Eli's hands moved with astonishing gentleness. He stroked the heron's neck in slow, careful arcs, as if he'd been born knowing how fragile living things can be. That night we made a nest box from a milk crate and rags. Eli sat beside it for an hour, silent, watching the heron's breathing. In the air, the words softened. He knows pain. This is how he learns to choose kindness instead of fire. For the first time I believed them, not because of magic, but because I saw a path opening where the old one had been a cliff. Peace in Greywater never lasted. The town liked its stories simple. Bad men were bad. Good women endured. Children grew into whatever the adults decided they were. A child who changed course threatened everyone's certainty. It started with whispers at the corner store. "Mara bought that boy," someone said, as if I'd bought a new boat. "Maybe she's trying to look holy. Maybe she's lonely." I ignored them. I'd survived worse than small-town judgment. But then June Harrow came to my shack one afternoon while I was hauling parts from the ferry. Eli was alone inside, and I hadn't locked the door because the marsh had always felt like a wall. I saw June's car first dust rising on the dirt track, the sun flashing off her windshield. My stomach dropped. I ran. By the time I reached the boardwalk, I heard shouting from inside. June's voice, high and angry, and the sharp, thin sound of something breaking. I burst in to find June gripping Eli's wrist, her nails dug into his skin. Eli's eyes were huge, terrified, and his other hand was clenched around a screwdriver like a weapon. The heron, now recovering, flapped in its crate, panicked. "He attacked me," June shouted before I could speak. "I came to see if he was alive and he attacked me." The lie was practiced. Her forearm was marked with red lines where Eli had scratched, not bitten. Eli's mouth opened, but no words came. His face crumpled with the helpless rage of someone who has never been believed. The floating words erupted like fireworks. She came to provoke him. Don't let her rewrite the scene. Show teeth. I grabbed June's wrist and yanked her hand off Eli. "Get out," I said, low and steady. June recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "You can't talk to me like that," she hissed. "I can," I replied, "because you are in my home, touching my child. Leave." June's eyes flicked to the crate. "Is that a bird?" she sneered. "You're collecting strays now?" She stepped closer, and in a quick, ugly motion she kicked the milk crate. It toppled. The heron shrieked, wings beating against plastic, and Eli made a sound I'd never heard from him, a raw, animal cry. He lunged, not at June's face, but at her ankle, grabbing hard as if to stop her from moving. June screamed and tried to shake him off. For a second the room was chaos. Feathers, curses, Eli's grip like a clamp. I seized the old flare gun from the shelf above my workbench, aimed it at the ceiling, and fired. The flare burst with a blinding red roar, sizzling as it embedded in the wood and smoked. June froze, eyes wide. Eli froze too, staring at the flaming hole as if the fire had been summoned by his fear. Smoke curled. I kept the flare gun raised. "Out," I said again. June backed toward the door, shaking. "You're crazy," she spat. "That boy is crazy." She left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Eli's hands trembled. He looked at the flare's dying glow, and then at me, waiting for punishment. I lowered the gun and knelt beside him. "You protected the heron," I said softly. "But you can't grab people. We use words first." His lips moved. Nothing came out. Tears rolled down his cheeks in silence. The words in the air steadied into a single warning. "She will bring a crowd." June didn't wait long. 2 mornings later, as I was tightening bolts under the ferry's engine hood, I heard tires on the gravel and voices swelling like a storm. I climbed out and saw a line of people marching down the dock road toward my shack. June at the front, Silas beside her, and behind them a cluster of neighbors carrying moral outrage like lanterns. Greywater loved a spectacle, especially one that let them feel righteous. I left the ferry half open and ran. When I reached my property, they were already on the boardwalk, shouting, "Open up!" someone yelled. "We just want to talk." June waved her arm, displaying bruises she'd painted on her own story. "That boy hurt me," she cried. "He's dangerous. Mara's hiding him." Eli stood behind me in the doorway, small and rigid, hands clenched. His eyes flicked across the faces like a cornered deer. The floating words appeared again, bright with urgency. "Stand in front. Do not let them pull him out. They want a monster. Don't give them one." I stepped onto the threshold so my body blocked the gap. "Leave my property," I said. You have no right, Silas laughed. No right? That's my blood in there, he said, though he'd treated that blood like a tool. You bought him, but you didn't buy his sins. Someone behind him muttered, Kids like that grow up mean. Another said, He'll burn your boats. Mark my words. The irony made my teeth ache. They were repeating the prophecy without knowing it, building the future they feared. June's voice rose. He tried to stab me, she lied. He's got a weapon. Eli flinched. I felt him shift, as if he might run. I couldn't let him. I reached behind me and took his hand, not as a restraint but as an anchor. You're trespassing, I said. If you don't leave, I call the sheriff. A man I barely knew, Troy Kessler, who drank at the marina and liked to touch women's shoulders without asking, stepped forward, face smug. Maybe you need to be taught manners, Quinn, he said. He put one foot on my boardwalk like he owned it. The marsh wind smelled of salt and rot. My father's voice echoed in memory. People who ignore your no will ignore your pain. The words in the air flashed. Show them consequences. I reached to the side, lifted the fishing spear I kept by the door for snakes and stray dogs, and planted its tip into the wood with a thud. Next step, and you'll limp home, I said. My voice didn't shake. I surprised myself. The crowd quieted. Fear and shame rolled through them, and I watched them decide whether their righteousness was worth blood. June's eyes narrowed. You'd stab a neighbor? She demanded. I'd protect my child, I corrected. Behind the crowd, an older man's voice cut through, loud as a bell. What in God's name is this? The harbor warden, Mr. Bellamy, pushed his way forward. He was 65, skin toughened by decades of salt, and his authority in Greywater was older than the sheriff's. He looked from June's bruises to my spear to Eli's hollow face. You're making a mob, he said, disgusted. You want to see a woman and a kid dragged through the mud so you can feel clean? People mumbled. June tried to speak, but Bellamy raised a hand. Off the boardwalk, he ordered. All of you. Now. The crowd hesitated, then began to back away, one by one, as if the spell had broken. June lingered. She glared at Eli. He'll pay, she hissed. I lifted the spear a fraction. June finally turned and left with Silas. Bellamy stayed. He looked at me, then at the flare-burned hole in my ceiling visible through the open door. You in trouble, Mara? He asked quietly. I wanted to say no. Instead, I said, I don't know what's coming. Bellamy's eyes softened. Whatever it is, he said, don't face it alone. The words in the air hovered, almost tender. One alley is enough to change a tide. After the crowd left, Eli trembled for an hour. He paced in small circles, eyes darting to the windows as if expecting stones. I sat on the floor with him, silent, until his breathing slowed. That evening I found him behind my workbench, holding the flare casing in his palm like a relic. Fire, he whispered, and then barely audible. Bad, I swallowed. Fire isn't bad, I told him. Fire is a tool. It can cook food, light the dark, but it can also hurt. What matters is who holds it and why. Eli stared at his own hand as if measuring what he could become. The floating text appeared in fragments. He thinks he is the match. Show him he can be the lamp. The next week was calm on the surface, but tension clung to the town like humidity. People stopped meeting my eyes. The corner store clerk handed me change without touching my fingers, as if I carried contagion. Eli sensed it. He stayed close, following me from room to room. When I left for work, he waited on the porch with the heron perched on the railing, both of them watching the road. One day, trying to coax him into the world without forcing it, I brought him to the ferry's maintenance shed. I gave him a tiny screwdriver set and an old compass that didn't point north anymore. See if you can fix it, I said. He sat cross-legged on the concrete and turned the compass over and over, fascinated by the needle's stubborn drift. For an hour he was absorbed, quiet but not empty. Then, from outside, a laugh barked. Silas. I saw him through the open door, leaning against a post with two of his friends, a bottle in hand. There's my boy, he called, voice thick with mock affection. Eli froze. His shoulders rose to his ears. The screwdriver in his hand tightened. The words in the air flared like warning lights. He will choose a path here. Interrupt the old pattern. I stepped between Silas and Eli. Leave, I said. Silas's grin widened. He owes me, he said. Blood owes blood. He owes you nothing, I replied. Silas's eyes hardened. Watch your mouth, he snapped, stepping forward. I saw his hand lift. Not quite a punch yet, but the beginning of one. Eli moved. It happened too fast for thought. He slid to the side, lifted the screwdriver, and stabbed it into Silas's boot, just above the toe. Not deep enough to kill, deep enough to hurt. Silas howled, jerking back. His friends surged, angry. Eli's face had no triumph, only terror. He had done what he'd been trained to do. Strike first, because mercy had never protected him. I grabbed Eli's shoulders. No, I said sharply, and then softened my voice at once, because sharpness was a knife to him. No more hurting. Silas spat on the concrete. See? He shouted to his friends. He's a little devil. He'll kill somebody. I looked him dead in the eye. And you're the one who taught him violence, I said. So if you want to point fingers, point at your own hands. Silas's face went red with rage and shame. He limped away, swearing, promising consequences. When he was gone, Eli's whole body shook. He stammered, words tripping over the years of silence. I'm sorry, he finally forced out. The sentence was clumsy, raw, but it existed, and that was a miracle. I pulled him into a hug. He went rigid, then slowly, as if surrendering to gravity, leaned into me. The air filled with a new line, faint but fierce. He learned to apologize. That's not how monsters start. Silas didn't call the sheriff. He couldn't, not without explaining why a screwdriver had reached his boot. Instead, he stewed, and June stewed with him, and the stew turned into something darker. 2 nights later, while I was asleep, someone crept onto my boardwalk. I woke to a soft scraping sound, like metal against wood. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window. In the beam, I saw Troy Kessler crouched by my crab traps, hands on the rope, trying to drag them toward the edge. Theft, plain and simple. Eli appeared beside me in silence. I felt his breath hitch. He reached for the spear. The words in the air flashed. Stop him without blood. The law is a tool too. I squeezed Eli's wrist gently. No spear, I whispered. I flicked on the porch light instead. Troy, I called. Step away from my traps. Troy jerked, eyes wide, then forced a grin. Mara, he slurred. Didn't know you were awake. Put it back, I said. Troy's grin twisted. Or what? He challenged. Or I blow a whistle and the whole dock hears you. I replied, and lifted the metal whistle I kept for fog. I didn't have to blow it. The threat of witnesses was enough. Troy's face tightened with resentment. He dropped the rope. As he backed away, his eyes slid to Eli in the window. That kid's trouble, he muttered. You'll see. He left. In the quiet that followed, Eli's hands trembled. He looked at the whistle, then at me. Law? He asked softly, tasting the word like a new tool. Law, I confirmed. It's supposed to protect people. Eli's brow furrowed as if he didn't believe protection could be a system instead of a person. The floating text drifted, almost thoughtful. He will use this later. Plant the idea now. Days turned into a month. The heron healed. Learned to hop, and then to glide short distances. Eli fed it minnows, talking to it in a low voice that was more sound than language. Sometimes I heard him in the yard at dusk, saying simple things. Eat, safe, stay. Each word was a stone laid on a bridge. Then, one morning, Eli woke from a nightmare and ran to the pantry corner before I could catch him. He pressed his hands over his ears, rocking. She's under, he whispered. She's under. My heart stopped. Who's under? I asked gently. Eli's eyes were unfocused, seeing something that wasn't the pantry wall. Mama, he said, voice breaking. She's under the floor. He put her. The words in the air exploded, urgent and grim. This is the secret. He saw it. Don't let them silence him again. I sat down on the floor, slow, so I wouldn't frighten him. Eli, I said, steadying my voice with all the strength I had. Tell me what you remember. He shook his head violently. Bad, he choked out. Bad. He clawed at his hair. I took his hands, held them firmly but not painfully. You're safe, I said. And if something happened to your mom, we can make it right. We can tell someone who will listen. Eli's breathing came in jagged bursts. They won't, he whispered. I thought of the crowd on my boardwalk, eager to believe the worst of him. I thought of June's lies. I thought of Greywater's convenient stories. I will, I said. I'll listen, and I'll make them listen. The air offered one steady instruction. Go to Bellamy first. He still believes in evidence. That afternoon, I took Eli to Bellamy's office above the harbor station. It smelled of coffee and rope tar. Bellamy looked up from his paperwork and saw Eli clinging to my sleeve. You all right, kid? He asked. Eli stared at the floor. I didn't force him to answer. I explained instead, carefully, without drama, because drama was a weapon people used to dismiss women. Eli says his mother didn't leave. I told Bellamy. He says she's under the floor at Silas's place. Bellamy's face tightened. He set his pen down. That's a serious claim, he said slowly. Where'd you get that idea? Eli's shoulders hunched. I could see him shutting down, bracing for disbelief. The floating text hovered, calmer now. Let him speak one piece. One piece is enough. I crouched slightly beside Eli. You don't have to tell everything, I murmured. Just one thing you're sure about. Eli's mouth moved. His throat worked. Finally, he whispered, barely audible, Storm night. Bellamy leaned forward. Storm night, he repeated. Last summer? Eli nodded once. Bellamy glanced at me. Silas told folks the mother ran off during the hurricane, he said. Said she couldn't handle the marsh. He rubbed his jaw. But there were things that didn't add up. He looked back at Eli. Do you know where under the floor? Eli hesitated, then lifted one shaking finger and pointed downward, as if he could see through the office boards to another house. Shed, he whispered. Old. Cellar. Bellamy exhaled. All right, he said. I'm not promising anything yet, but I'll call the sheriff and a deputy. We'll do this the right way. The word right felt fragile, like glass. Bellamy told us to wait in the corridor. Eli sat on a bench, feet not touching the floor. His eyes were huge. I held his hand. The floating words drifted in soft clusters. Brave's thing he's done. Brave's thing you've done too. When Bellamy came out again, he wasn't alone. Deputy Larkin, a woman with a tight braid and a tired gaze, stood beside him. We're going to Dock Street, Larkin said. Mara, you coming? Yes, I said at once. And Eli? Larkin looked at the boy. He can come if he wants, she said, but he doesn't have to be there. Eli's grip tightened on my fingers. Go, he whispered, and then surprised both of us by adding, I go. On the drive, the town flashed by in sun-bleached strips. The store, the church, the school that barely had enough kids to stay open. People stared as the sheriff's truck rolled past. When we pulled up to Silas's house, June came out first, cigarette in hand, eyes narrowing at the uniforms. What's this about? She demanded. Silas appeared behind her, face hard. His gaze hit Eli and turned cruel. Look who's back, he sneered. Larkin held up a paper. We have cause to inspect the property, she said. Step aside. Silas laughed. Cause? Because my boy has bad dreams? Larkin's face didn't change. Step aside, she repeated. Bellamy walked straight to the shed. The boards were newer than the rest of the place, as if someone had rebuilt in a hurry. Larkin pried up a corner plank. The smell that rose was old, damp, and wrong. June's bravado cracked. What are you doing? She shrieked. The deputy didn't answer. They opened the hatch to the cellar. Darkness yawned. Then, as the flashlight beam cut through, a shape appeared. A bundle wrapped in plastic, half buried. Eli made a thin sound, a breath turning to a sob. I put my arms around him before he fell. Silas shouted, That's not. But the words died in his throat as Larkin's face tightened. Bellamy turned, eyes blazing. Silas Rojas, he said, voice low and deadly. Hands where I can see them. June backed away, mouth open, as if she'd forgotten that lies can be dug up. The floating text in my vision didn't cheer. It simply stated, almost mournfully, Truth is heavy. Let him drop it. Eli pressed his face into my jacket, shaking. Mama, he whispered, and the syllables were a wound. Greywater split in two after that. Some people acted shocked, as if they hadn't watched June yank a chain on a child. Others insisted they'd always suspected Silas. The same mouths that had called Eli dangerous now called him poor thing. as if sympathy could erase their earlier hunger for a scapegoat. Silas and June were arrested that night. The sheriff drove them away while neighbors watched from porches, whispering. The town's certainty cracked, and in the crack there was light and ugliness both. Eli didn't speak for 3 days. He moved like a ghost, feeding the heron, sorting screws, staring at the marsh. On the 4th day, he asked, voice small, "She gone?" I knelt beside him. "Yes," I said, "but what happened to her will be known, and the people who did it will face consequences." Eli's eyes were dry. "Jail?" he asked. "Jail," I confirmed. He considered that. "Law, tool," he whispered, almost to himself. I nodded. "A tool," I said. That night, when I thought he was asleep, I heard him on the porch. I stepped quietly to the door. He was sitting on the boardwalk, looking at the water, the heron beside him like a sentinel. Eli's voice was a thread. "Mama," I told. He whispered. I told. I didn't interrupt. The floating words appeared once more, dimmer than before, like embers fading. This is the turning point. He could have become a fire. Instead, he became a signal. In the weeks that followed, the town's shame curdled into avoidance. People crossed the street rather than face me. The corner store clerk pretended not to notice when Eli entered with me, as if acknowledging him would remind her of her own failure. At first I was angry. Then I realized Greywater was doing what it always did, sanding down discomfort until it could pretend it had never existed. I refused to let Eli be sanded away. I started taking him to the harbor station where Bellamy taught him knots. I brought him to the ferry where he listened to engines and asked, in halting phrases, why pistons moved the way they did. I found a second-hand set of textbooks at a yard sale and brought them home, stacking them on the table like a promise. "We'll learn," I said. Eli traced the letters on the cover with one finger. "Read," he whispered, as if reading was a kind of magic. "Read," I echoed. The floating text, which had grown quiet, flashed a rare burst of enthusiasm. "Yes, education is a key. Keep going." Winter came. Storms rolled in, bending the reeds until they whispered flat to the mud. One night, the power went out, and Eli panicked at the sudden dark, breath ragged. I lit a lantern and set it on the table. The flame was small, contained. I watched Eli watch it. "Fire," he said. And then, after a long pause, "Good?" I smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached my eyes. "Good," I agreed, "when we choose it." For the first time, Eli smiled back a tiny, uncertain curve. It looked like dawn breaking over water. The floating words didn't vanish all at once. They faded gradually, like a crowd losing interest when the tragedy turned into work. There were days I saw nothing at all and felt oddly lonely, like someone had left the room without saying goodbye. Then, in early spring, a final cluster appeared, less like commentary and more like a map. "Leave Greywater. They will never stop seeing him as their shame. Go south where no one knows the story." I hated that the words were right. I hated that the town could prove a child's innocence and still treat him like an accusation. But I'd learned long ago that sometimes survival required changing geography. I sold my shack before the marsh could swallow it in another hurricane. I traded my ferry job for a position in a shipyard down the coast, where engines were bigger and gossip was smaller. Eli and I packed into my battered truck tools, books, the heron's crate, and the tin box that now held fewer bills but a heavier purpose. The gold coin bracelet stayed in the box, untouched. On the morning we left, Bellamy came to the roadside with a paper bag. "For the drive," he said, handing it to Eli. Eli opened it and found a compass new, sturdy, north-pointing. Eli's fingers trembled around it. He looked up at Bellamy, then surprised both of us by saying, "Thank you, sir." Bellamy's eyes shone. "You keep going," he said. "Don't let anybody write your story for you." As we drove away, Greywater shrank in the rearview mirror until it was just a smudge of docks and marsh grass. Eli watched it without expression. Then he turned forward and exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing a weight he'd been carrying since birth. The new town, Port Harlow, smelled of diesel and fried plantains. Nobody asked why Eli didn't talk much. Nobody cared where his scars came from. In anonymity, he grew. He learned to read by sounding out street signs and manuals. He learned math by counting bolts and measuring wire. At 14, he could rebuild a boat radio from scratch. At 16, he fixed the shipyard's water pump with parts scavenged from junk, saving the manager a week of delays. People praised his skill without attaching it to tragedy. They simply said, "That kid's got a mind." For the first time, the word mind felt like a compliment instead of a warning. I worked hard 2 shifts some days, 3 jobs when money was tight. I wasn't a saint. I was tired, often, but every time I saw Eli's shoulders straighten a little more, I felt the exhaustion turn into something like pride. One evening, years later, as Eli studied at the table, I noticed the air above the lamp shimmer. A single line of light appeared, so faint I almost missed it. "You didn't save him alone. He saved himself. Because you gave him room." Then the words winked out, and the room was only ours again. Eli earned a scholarship to an engineering program the way a river earns its path, by moving, relentlessly, around every rock placed in its way. On the day his acceptance letter arrived, he held it in both hands as if it might dissolve. "They want me," he said, bewildered. "They want me to go." I wiped grease from my fingers and read the letter twice, then laughed until I cried. "They want you," I confirmed. "Because you're brilliant." Eli blinked, uncertain about praise. He had learned facts faster than feelings. He pointed to a paragraph about tuition and housing. "Money," he said, worry creeping in. I tapped the tin box. "We've got a plan," I said. I didn't tell him about the bracelet yet. The gold would be for emergencies, for the kind of storm you couldn't predict. The college city was inland, loud with traffic and crowded with people who moved as if the world belonged to them. Eli moved differently, quiet, observant, hands always learning. In his first semester, he called me twice a week. Short conversations where he reported what he'd fixed, what he'd built, what he'd understood. "They have a lab," he said once, voice full of wonder. "A room of tools, proper tools. Use them," I told him, "and be kind to yourself when you make mistakes." There was a pause. Then he said, softly, "I'm trying." Years passed. Silas and June were convicted, their names spoken in Greywater with the stiff discomfort of people who'd nearly cheered for the wrong ending. I heard the news through Bellamy once, in a letter that smelled faintly of harbor smoke. "Eli did right," he wrote. "You did too." I kept the letter in my tin box. Eli graduated with honors, then stayed on to work in a research group designing low-cost desalination units for coastal communities. He said he wanted water that didn't make children sick. He said he remembered the marsh, the way people boiled water and still got fevers. He said, in the careful way he spoke about old things, "If I can make the salt come out, maybe the hurt can come out too." I didn't fully understand, but I understood enough. On the day Eli's first prototype was installed in a small fishing village, a local news station covered it. I watched the clip on a borrowed television, heart-pounding. Eli stood beside the humming machine in a hard hat, taller now, shoulders broad, eyes bright. A reporter asked him where he'd learned to work with his hands. Eli hesitated. Then he said, clear and steady, "From my mother." The reporter blinked. "Your mother is an engineer?" Eli smiled slightly. "My mother is someone who refused to let me be thrown away," he said. "That's a kind of engineering." I covered my mouth with my hand. Tears slipped through my fingers. That night Eli called. "Did you see?" he asked. "I saw," I whispered. There was a pause, and then he said the words I'd waited for since Dock Street. "Thank you, Mom." The title settled on me like a warm coat. "You're welcome," I said, voice shaking. "Always." After we hung up, I sat on my porch in Port Harlow, listening to distant waves. The sky was scattered with stars, brighter than Greywater's ever were. I looked at the air above the railing, half expecting letters to appear one last time. Nothing did. There was only wind, salt, and the steady sound of water moving forward. And in that quiet, I realized the invisible watchers had never been the point. The point was that a child's story is not a prophecy. It is a choice, made one small decision at a time, like stepping across a boardwalk over dark water without falling in.